Hi everyone, I'm Danielle Byington, and in this video we're going to be discussing Julian of Norwich's biography. So first, before I get into the bullet points here, I want to show you on Google Maps exactly like where we are talking about now. Okay, so right here, United States over to the left, of course, right there, and then over here towards Europe, going to the UK. And some of my other videos have talked recently about London, so London there in the southeast, and even further to the east, Canterbury, such as the Canterbury Tales. Now, Norwich, the specifically the church where Julian is sealed in a cell as an anchorist. So that's much further to the north, right there. So just so you have a little bit of perspective here. Um, so uh, the so you've got the British Isles, and then like the United Kingdom is that, of course, but Scotland is this northern portion of the island, the main island right here I'm talking about, and England is the southern part. Just to kind of make this more understandable, you could think of if you live in the States, if you're familiar with the states, specifically Tennessee, because I teach at East Tennessee State University. Um, England is like if you took the state of Tennessee and it's a long horizontal state regarding its boundaries. If you flip it upright, England is like approximately about that same length. So just so you can kind of judge how far Norwich is from London, where a lot of the material I cover in videos is based, or the authors lived at some point in their life or another. Um, at the time of in Julian's lifetime, Norwich. I was going to zoom in much further, actually. Sorry. At the time of in Julian's lifetime, Norwich was like roughly the second largest city in the medieval period in England. So the first, being London. And I'm going to zoom all the way in here so you can kind of get a look at the area around, the layout, how things kind of look this way now. So even a street, an alley named after St. Julian's, the church there. Let me go back to the bullet points and talk a little bit more about that church. Okay, so that church that we were talking about regarding her becoming an anchoress, that has been rebuilt. I'm not positive how much of it that has been rebuilt was original. I'm guessing not much because unfortunately, it did become dilapidated over time, but it was struck. It was bombed during the Blitz when the Nazis were bombing England extensively in 1942. And so it was the only church that was destroyed in Norwich that was rebuilt later, a few years later, about a decade or a little more later. So what stands is it's not the same place that the Julian of Norwich we're talking about would have had her cell. And the cell also it was long gone before that, maybe the 18th century, because the structure just wasn't taken care of. So as far as Julian's life goes, uh, we don't know a lot about her, and this is another sort of issue because of her being a woman in medieval times. If you are looking at this reading in a text, whether you're a student in my class or elsewhere, if you're looking at this perhaps through an anthology, and let's say it's something like an anthology set of early English literature, The medieval text is always pretty small compared to the next volume, which is usually the early modern era, 16th and 17th century, which is 2 or 3 times bigger because by then they have the advent of the printing press, which expands literacy rates like threefold. So we're still in the late Middle Ages here, roughly late 1300s, early 1400s when we're talking about Julian of Norwich. And that means documentation isn't as good as it's going to get a little better moving into that next era. But you also have like only a couple of women authors in anthologies like that for just the Middle Ages. So her gender could also be a reason we don't know much because if she had been married, her maiden name would have changed. Another issue is the waves of the plague. Her whole family could have been wiped out. So maybe she was married, maybe she was children. There's speculation that that was a thing because of something she mentions in her text. Um, she might have changed her name upon becoming an anchoress. So everything we know about her is like almost nothing, including her name. So, speaking of the plague, speaking of illness, now it's not the plague, but she does become very ill, and this is the source of her religious visions, from which she has the Book of Showings or the Book of Revelations, or Revelations of Divine Love. You have some sort of synonymous titles here when we're talking about her work. Now, when she becomes ill, you might think of this as a sort of fever from infection, some sort of infection where someone is going into septic shock. Another good example of that would be a lot of documentation from, say, World War One. When I teach literature from World War One, for example, that comes up because the soldiers in the trenches were had documented this extensively. The event of this, when someone goes in septic shock, it's like the same as being on hallucinogenics, basically, because your body has reached the brink of, hey, I can't fight this infection anymore. Pretty sure we're dying. That's a traumatic thing for the brain to realize. And so all these fun, feel good chemicals are released. And um, this is often thought of to be the source of near death experiences that people have. And in her case, this infection, whatever this illness was, probably brought her to the brink of that. And so, in septic shock, people have hallucinations, auditory and visual hallucinations. And for Julian, we have these visions of Christ on the crucifix and such. But you notice, such as in my last bullet point there, this isn't scary. Dying, the thought of your own death should be absolutely terrifying. But this is, another part of the thing your brain does to protect yourself from yourself when you're dying is all those feel good kind of things. It's euphoric. And this isn't just a documentation of, oh, she was really, really sick, but then she got better. The people around her thought she was going to be dead by the end of that night as well. It was so certain that she was just about to cross over and die that a priest was brought in and given her final rites. That comes up in her writings as well. So she has these religious visions, and she has it 16 showings, and she documents these. There's a short version of this text and a longer version, and we have a sort of 15-year meditation on this experience that she documents. That she's kind of meditating, considering, pondering. What did that mean that happened to me? Why did that happen to me? Why did I see those things? And so This kind of shapes the path of her life where she becomes an anchoress, which is similar to becoming a nun. There's a sort of ceremony, a sort of oath, a process where, like, the old you is gone when you take this oath and you do this. So, for an anchoress, basically a ceremony is given that's not unlike funeral rites, because who you were originally to the world is now dead. And you are just this vessel for doing good for God. And this means she's not us. Now, you might think of, well, how is it different from a nun then? An anchoress must live in a cell the rest of her life. So it's different from a nun in that way. A nun, you might see nuns in an airport, sometimes going on missionary trips. So an anchoress is sealed away in the cell. And for Julian, this was the church I just showed you on Google Maps. That's where she spent the rest of her life, the next few decades of her life. And she had three windows in this cell. One is open to the church, so she gets to see the services and such that she wants to see and experience. She has another window where a sort of assistant or someone who works with the church comes and brings her sustenance, like food and water. Um, Also, things like pen and paper, because this is part of her process. So, the meditation on her visions that she had. Uh, all this documenting and trying to understand what it means is very relevant to existentialism. It really is curious about what is the meaning of life. Now, this is why you have the word mystics and mystical and mysticism often associated with her name. Now, she comes up under the branch of Christian mysticism. There are different types of mysticism, though. So, another really well known writer would be Rumi, Rumi, uh, who was Islamic, though. So, that he's still considered a mystic writer, however. And what that means is it's about a sort of disassociation from the material world and letting go of your ego and trying to transcend closer to God, all that is, the universe, like whatever label you want to put on it, to grasp some positive meaning of life and existence. It's usually not in a selfish way, like a singular way, like, what am I supposed to do? It's usually more discussed in a sort of plural term of, like kindness to each other, love thy neighbor. The show isn't just about you. You're not just the main character. We're all the main characters. Um, Another example of this might be uh, Ram Dass, so um, who started as a professor, a professor of psychology who was studying hallucinogenics in like the 50s or 60s, and some of his work you will often hear that label attached to it as he was a mystic. And see, that sounds more radical the way he was approaching it, that because it didn't start out as something being attached to religion like with Julian of Norwich, but it's the same idea, a sort of like trying to understand existence, trying to understand the world and why we are all here. So she had this experience at 30 years old. Specifically, she tells you she was 30 and a half years old. So this wasn't a naive younger person, not a preteen or a child. to which someone might be able to more easily excuse this. This is very clearly a woman and an adult who has had life experiences when this has happened. So her ability to articulate these, it's hard to kind of push it aside as it was just, or it's more difficult rather to push it aside as it's just a bad dream, in her time. And another thing about this um, time period, she was really taking a big chance in writing the things she was writing, talking about the things she was talking about, um, because women talking about and writing, nonetheless, about a pretty outlandish experience like this, you're like really just like a fine hair away from being accused of things like witchcraft. So it was pretty bold and brave of her to, stick by her faith and pursue this. Because another video you'll see that I have soon, where this kind of not the same, but some other parallels. It doesn't work out for Anne Askew, who, is dedicated to her faith and trying to stick by it in a positive way to better the world. But Henry VIII wasn't having it. So she is referred to as the mother of English prose because it's kind of described as she was making her own type of English when she was writing this down. Now, it's still Middle English, and when you are reading this now, you're seeing modern spellings and such. But if you look up some Middle English versions of her text, it doesn't, you can see that it does vary from, say, like Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. And that's because there were different dialects of that, just like there are different dialects of all languages. But her writing that as prose and not just trying, she wasn't trying to write hymns or songs about her experience. She was writing it in this very like memoir kind of way. And I mentioned this earlier, but just to highlight it more clearly, one of the biggest takeaways of all this is that when she talks about her experience, there's no fear. Like there was no fear of death when she's talking about the visions that she's having. Her God is not a wrathful God. There is no punishment or revenge. It is very much so highlighted that just everything is, and everything exists with acceptance and forgiveness. Okay, so that's all I have for you for the Julian of Norwich biography. Thank you for watching.